given that I'm at the federal level, and James asked me to speak to the major issues that face Manitobans in this upcoming provincial election, and there are many. He asked me to try to zero it down to 3. Certainly, I mean, high on the list would be transition to a green economy. High on the list would be water issues, obviously. Energy issues. Food security. The plight of farmers throughout our place, particularly in Manitoba. How do we see ourselves 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 7 generations from now? Social justice. Where are we on issues of inner city livability? Where are we on the crime issues that have been so important in terms of the election issues at the mayoralty level in Winnipeg? Those are local, provincial, but they also resonate nationally. And when you look at the scheme of issues, particularly, and I'm going to highlight 3 because it's always there are always more issues than one can boil down to a trio. But clearly, energy policy, and we don't have an energy policy in Manitoba, but don't kick yourselves about it. There's no energy policy for Canada. We're the only country in the OECD without an energy policy. We're also the only country in the OECD without a transportation policy. We're also the only country in the OECD without a cultural policy. We're the only country in the OECD without a food policy. You see, we can go on, there's fill in the blanks. Canada is a country that operates, unfortunately, at the federal level, more through ad hocery and incrementalism than through vision. And this can be laid directly at the feet of political, it's hard to call them leaders, but the political representatives of the major political parties who dictate what becomes policy in this country. Our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, doesn't, I've got to say, I was pleased to see the energy ministers of this country get together and actually use the words energy and policy for Canada in the same sentence. Yeah. Now, the fact that the first time they were able to gather together and have such a meeting was sponsored by the oil and gas industry. Yeah. No, I'm not kidding. It was somewhat disquieting. But at least they were willing to talk about the need for a national energy policy in this country, a national energy strategy. Because in the federal-provincial relationship, in which municipalities also play a really important role, if we could have a national goal, notice I didn't say a federal goal, a national goal, something about which all levels of government could agree, then we could aspire to policy coherence. So the efforts of municipal governments, provincial governments, and federal governments would all be aiming for the same goal. That would be, certainly, you'd be happier to see, since there's only one taxpayer and we pay taxes at all 3 levels, it would be nice to see the efforts of 3 levels of government coordinated. It would be nice to see policy coherence. As someone who, it's not entirely laughable that I could be your Prime Minister someday. It could happen. Woo! I don't think it will be a majority government at the end of the 2015 election. However, this is what I work for, is the notion that Canada as a country, from coast to coast to coast, that we have as regions, as diverse cultures, as separate communities, far more in common than we have in the difference, and that if we could pull ourselves together, which I believe we can do because it's in Canadians' DNA to cooperate. It may not be in Stephen Harper's DNA, but in the nature of our country, we like to work together. We'd rather make progress by working together than waste our time fighting. And I believe that if we could set some national goals, we could get the policy coherence that moved behind those goals so that we could actually deliver on them. And that's something that applies to the things I want to talk about tonight. But if we had a focus on energy, if we had a focus on food, and we had a focus on water, we would be able to address those issues. And the really interesting thing about them is that we often could choose a solution to one that simultaneously improves the circumstances in the other 2. because they're not disconnected issues. If we look at, I left Saskatoon this morning, so I don't have a Winnipeg paper with me for this morning. But the news out of the Saskatoon Star Phoenix was, and it's, I'm sure, exactly the same for Manitoba farmers. Crop insurance pays record $329 million for unseeded acres. The overly wet spring, the incredibly wet spring, meant that farmers couldn't plant. So for Saskatchewan farmers, and for what it meant for the Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation, record levels of payouts to farmers. If you look at the federal budget of the Government of Canada, again, significant, I think it was $329 million, same figure actually, I think, went from the federal government to assist farmers in the prairies because of what happened in 2010 in terms of extreme flooding, extreme weather events, and what it did for crops. So we're paying out a lot right now to try and keep farmers afloat. And yet we know, if you look at food policy, that Canadian farmers can't make a living from farming. The Canadian farmers have to earn at least some or most of their income off farm, or they simply can't keep the farms going. So if you're looking at food policy, you have to ask yourself, well, why is it that Canada, as a nation that had been, and we always, we have a tremendous agricultural capacity in this country. Why would it be that farmers can't make a living on the farm? And doesn't that matter to people? And you have to ask, well, what are the overriding pressures of agricultural policy in Canada? And I think this trickles down to every single province, because I don't know a single province that has adopted the right approach to agriculture. Well, at the federal level, they are without a food policy, mind you, but it's clear that the policy priorities are two things. Increasing the export of Canadian food, increasing international trade in agricultural products, and a cheap food policy. Food security isn't mentioned. Making sure that Canadian farmers, Manitoba farmers, can produce food and live on the income from producing food so that people in Manitoba can eat healthy local food is actually not only not an objective, but heretical. It's subversive to the other goals of augmenting international trade in food products and ensuring that we have cheap food. So at a level of why would people want to look at the Green Party in the Manitoba election? Because we as a party support farmers, we support local healthy food, and we want to adjust our fiscal policies federally and provincially so as to support food security, ensure that Canadians have access to locally produced foods. It's not saying we're not against trade. I mean, let's face it, I don't think I'm the only one who doesn't want to wake up without coffee. We don't grow coffee. But we do grow a lot of things that I can't buy in a Canadian grocery store.